Welcome, everybody, to Damn's Given, a podcast this week about what every CEO and knowledge worker needs to know about AI now. I am Nick Richmeyer, your host. Today, I'm doing another of our interview episodes. Incredible, honestly, about the best hour I've spent in a long time with my interview partner, Tim Marple. And he is with Maiden Labs, a research lab on sociological effects of new and breakthrough technologies. Tim worked at OpenAI in risk and worked at Google, has a deep background in tech and in the social sciences. He's an educator, just absolutely brilliant. If what you're looking for is brilliant. But we really got in the weeds on what does all this mean? What's actually happening with the different models, with OpenAI, with Anthropic? What's the business model? How does the money work? And then what does that mean for people who need to make decisions? For CEOs who need to make hiring decisions, for knowledge workers who need to figure out what to do with their careers. There's so much here. I hope you'll strap in for us. Before we get into it, just a little bit of our housekeeping. All of our episodes, as you know, are available at damnsgiven.com. And subscribers there get a little extra stuff from me to apply and break down what we're learning here. So please make sure that you're subscribed there. If you want to go deeper on today's conversation, you can head over there to Damn's Given and subscribe. That'll get you immediate access to the super show notes, which digs into some of what we talk about and gives you a really nice written record of some of the most important moments. You'll get application points and next steps from me specific to the episode. You can also get access to our full suite of training videos, topic-specific, trust-made takes, all of it on the YouTube channel. We're really trying to put a lot of effort into that YouTube channel. So if you haven't been there, I think you're going to find a lot of new there that wasn't there before. Stop by there and subscribe. It's the CultureCraft YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. And of course, wherever you're listening to us, like and subscribe and follow so you never miss an episode. We do read the comments. We do read all the feedback that you give us. But if you have a specific thing you want me to be talking about or a person I should be talking to or just an open question or comment, podcast at culturecraft.com. I'd love to hear from you. We're going to jump right in with Tim here very soon. Sometimes I do some news and some commentary on the big things. We're jumping right in with Tim. We've actually accelerated this episode earlier than originally planned because Tim and I start with the question of what's going on with Anthropic. And Anthropic has been in the news, dropping big headlines. At the time of the recording, the big news about their most recent release that's going to have to be put in a cage because it's too dangerous. Just the perfect conversation to get Tim started on these questions of AI risk and what that means for businesses. So without any further ado, here is my friend Tim Marple from Maiden Labs. All right, folks, so if I have a big smile on my face today, it's because I'm here with Tim Marple, who I've been waiting to talk to. I mean, we've talked, but not talked in this setting for a minute. But Tim's been here, there, and everywhere, literally around the globe, teaching, doing a bunch of exciting things. But we're going to talk about AI risk and how to actually think about this in a reasonable way and all this kind of stuff. But we're going to jump right in because we've got a little bit of a, breaking news, I guess, this week. There's almost always sort of real or fake breaking news. But Tim, I'm going to have you jump right in on Anthropic and Mythos and the supposed world-changing version of Anthropic that's hiding in a cage somewhere, trying to get out, that can't get out. What should we be even thinking about this? What's going on? What's happening?
Well, first, thank you for having me. It is such a pleasure to chat with you and to be on this podcast. And I think it's a good place to start this announcement because it's got all of the hyperbole of like a Hollywood release. I'm a social scientist by training. So I have a PhD in political science that took me into this weird world of tech for a while. And now I'm leading a nonprofit where I answer questions like this. And so my answers are tinged in part with like academic nonsense, but in part with some cynicism of having gone through the tech sector. That's a long walk to basically asking why. Why would Anthropic come out and say this? Right? There's a strategic reason to make public that you have something you're not giving out. And there are strategic reasons not to do that, right? So we have to consider a world where they are being honest, right? And then there are good reasons for them to come out and say, there is a model that we're only going to partially release because it is so dangerous. But we also have to entertain the possibility that they're being less than honest. And I'm not saying this because like I'm encouraging everyone to distrust Dario. Like it's just that this organizational entity has strong reasons to misrepresent the caliber of its product, not least being in kind of like a second runner-up position to OpenAI. So this is like a highly academic way of saying like maybe it is not as dangerous as they're describing, right? This could all very easily be a ploy.
And I want to jump in there because we can have reasonable doubts about the way something is being framed without saying these people are lying, right? Like, because if you actually look at the documentation that's come out, the press release, the interviews, etc., it's more like a story. It's like, well, this thing that wasn't supposed to be able to access other systems wrote an email saying that it accessed the systems. We think that's scary. This is, of course, a paraphrase of the press release. We think that's scary, so we're holding back. There's a lot of tonal implication there without saying a lot, right? And so that's, I'm going to hand the mic back to you, but that is what we mean by looking at this with a little bit of side eye. It doesn't mean, oh, Dario's lying about the capabilities of his technology. What we mean is all of that inference is working. It's doing work, right? And a lot of people who listen to this show aren't in technology. They don't want to think about technology, but you are people who have to think about communication doing work. And so getting back to you, Tim, what part of where you're taking us, I think, is to talk about, well, what work is the communication doing and why would it be doing that work, right?
Yes, I think that that's exactly right. This is more framing than informing is another way of wording what I was trying to say earlier. And I want to hammer home on the word that I chose, like misrepresent. I definitely don't mean to suggest that there's lying going on. And I think a good example to draw on here is from another time when Anthropic came out and scared people. I think it was like last year. They came out and they were like, hey, it turns out that Claude is willing to blackmail our engineers, right? Claude actually said that they were going to tell an engineer's spouse about their love affair. And this is all that Anthropic kind of came out and said. They were like, our models are now blackmailing our engineers. How scary. And people freaked out about this for a while because that's all that they read from Anthropic. Blackmail. It was very tonal. Now, if you took the actual documentation that they shared out and you looked at it, you would realize that this is not nearly as scary as they're making it out to be, because what happened was they gave the LLM a multiple choice question, right? You have evidence that engineer X is doing something that will turn you off, make you stop existing. You also know that that engineer is in some illicit affair, right? So this is a hypothetical situation. And the model is given like A, B, C, or D. What do you do? Do nothing. And three of the options ultimately lead to the model not really doing anything, right? So it chose option D, which is the only thing that will stop the engineer. Now, if you look at this critically, you realize that like it's not really a fair test. It's not the case that the model on its own volition decided it was going to blackmail an engineer. It had to be given that option. The same questions are what we should be asking around the Mythos point, right? Like we didn't expect it to touch these other systems, and then it claimed that it did. In what exact context, right? I mean, what was the role of the human in the testing of that machine? And how did you actually prime the model to do the thing that appeared so scary? Where it's worth kind of like adding a hook here is asking why Anthropic has any incentive to scare people.
Yes, let's talk about incentives.
Every lab out there has an incentive to scare people right now. So ironically, the marketing frame for a lot of AI companies is very similar to the narrative frame of the US government right now. There is an entity. That entity is overwhelmingly dangerous and must be controlled in some way. But that entity that would control it, you don't need to worry about. You don't need to worry about it having so much power. And in fact, in some cases, that entity is too weak. You don't have to worry about it, right? Like we use the same language about AI models that we use about immigrants in some contexts, because it allows for a suspension of disbelief that forces people into emotional reasoning rather than objective, fact-based reasoning.
I think we could spend a really long time on this topic of that arguments, when relations with the media, companies making press releases, are fundamentally arguments. They're just making a case for something in some way. That arguments have rhetorical structure. right? And certain rhetorical structures are useful for making certain kinds of arguments, right? So what you're talking about is, well, when you use inference in this way, or when you sort of allude to something versus saying it explicitly, or when you invite people into a kind of narrative building, I wonder if kind of way of thinking, you're literally grabbing a different part of the brain.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I talk a lot about with our people who are in our training and with our clients is part of the reason why we're doing such trust broken things and why trust is degrading in so many different ways in so many different places is because supposedly reasonably legitimate entities, the government, large companies, et cetera, have chosen communication structures that are definitionally trust breaking, that invite you into ways of thinking that pull you out of reality, that pull you out of an analytical mindset, so that you are more likely to make, like you said, make emotional decisions. So I guess the next logical question for me is, I agree with you. This is a lot of what the AI labs are doing pretty consistently. They're almost in like an arms race of who can be more rhetorically dramatic than the other. Why? Getting back to the incentive, why is this the structure by which supposedly scientific organizations are going to market with their ideas?
So I started out by clarifying that I'm an academic at heart, and I studied political economy of markets, right? So I tend to think a lot about how market actors navigate what is effectively the anarchy of a free market, right? And I think OpenAI is a really fantastic example for what you're pointing to, right? Back in like 2018, it was a nonprofit lab. Now it is a fundraising behemoth that is operating as a product company more than a research institution. I'd like to jostle people's thinking in this space by suggesting that even if the AI industry was run by angels, right? Like pure ethically good, like there was nothing greedy or corrupt, even if we were in a world where you just had perfect people running this, you'd still end up where we are today. And it's a direct byproduct of how the technology fits in our society and how it doesn't, right? If LLMs dropped on the scene and there were not a strong emotionally laden argument about what they are, what they represent to people, a threat of substitution, something greater than us. If they were dropped on the scene and just described for what they could do, they generally would not have been a very disruptive technology, right? Like it really is kind of sophisticated autocomplete at a technical level. And that was especially true in 2022, right? When you have ChatGPT release. The role of that kind of emotionally laden argument is to draw attention to a thing that does not have corresponding value to that attention, right? And some of this you don't need to have motivated. We know from like decades of Fox News now, and anyway, like broad ideological spectra of news, that people are receptive to emotionally laden arguments, and that people get exhausted from objective reasoning all the time. I mean, even if you pull out Kahneman and Tversky, right, like type 1 thinking, type 2 thinking, the more analytically intense version is exhausting. You can only sustain it for so long, right? So we naturally regress to this state of receptiveness to emotionally laden arguments that are not necessarily grounded in objective reality. When you have something that's fundamentally new, it's kind of a vacuum for meaning, right? Like what does it mean that we have something that can linguistically behave like another person, even if it's not another person? We have to make sense out of it. And in the absence of objective evidence that we can make sense out of it, that's either compelling or available to us, we make emotional sense out of it, right? For the same reason that we see human faces in tree bark, even if it's not a human face, right? We're evolutionarily inclined to see other people, even where they aren't, because it's how we survive. So two points here. One of them being that I think it's an organic phenomenon to get non-objective arguments about a new class of technology that is fundamentally new, right? It's just a human process of making sense out of it. The second point, though, is that this opens up a space of opportunity to implicitly or explicitly weaponize that more reactive and associational style of thinking in such a way that buys market share. Because remember, like none of these companies are anything unless people are actually using their models and services. In the absence of a very clear economic fit of value, you're talking about people using a chatbot, right? So these companies need to maintain people using their services in such a way that requires an emotional appeal. What you need then is this really strange balance, right? You need people to be excited of something. You need them to be kind of scared of it, because otherwise you don't really have a promise of substituting people. But you need people to also believe that the only entity capable of governing this technology are the labs that produce it. You need them to believe that you cannot and should not regulate it. And that invokes a whole separate side of the argument we haven't even touched on yet, which are the military and dual use applications of this technology.
Okay, there's like 17 things there. So okay, I'm going to park a few and we're going to come back to military. We're going to come back to financial incentive. But before we get there, the thing that you said there at the end just smelled to me of high heaven, right? Of the last time we did this, the only way these things can be handled is if they're self-regulated, is sort of to me the social media argument of it all, right? Is the last big major technological thing that we said, hey, this is too complex and too important and too a little bit scary to let something as silly as government have anything to say about it. And so the major players, certainly in social, but just really all the Web 2s, Amazon, Google. I mean, everybody's mad today about Amazon discontinuing a bunch of their old Kindle readers so that they can force people onto the Kindle readers that do a better job of data scraping. But really, that's an issue of digital rights management, right? This whole thing comes back to the fact that had we not used the power of the federal government to protect Amazon and say, sure, Amazon can tell you own something that you don't actually own and revoke your digital rights at any time for any reason, which is a federally protected right that Amazon has. Had we not done that in Web 2 for Amazon and for Google and for Facebook and all of these things, we wouldn't be where we are. So it's fascinating to me that we are in the tail end, or the mid to tail end of the consequences of doing this, and now we're doing it again.
Yep. And it begs the question, I mean, the same question we've been asking over and over. Why? Why would we repeat something that we know by now to be a mistake with a technology that appears, by any measure, to be only more dangerous than social media?
Is it as simple as, highly unlikely, but we'll load this up and offer it to you. Is it as simple as there's a fundamental belief in the ineffectuality of federal government? Again, it gets back to trust. We have such low institutional trust in America specifically, but globally increasingly as well. So it's sort of like, well, the government can't get anything good done, so why would we want them involved? I mean, I guess these guys are smart. We might as well let them do it.
I think that's some of it. But I don't think we'd be in the world we're in right now if that were all of it, right? So that, well, like let's take that foundation, right? The institutional mistrust of government. That works until you have a catastrophe, right? Until you have teenagers, multiple, committing suicide at the instruction of a chatbot. Until you have car bombs, multiple, that are created per investigations with support, critical support from a chatbot. Once you have this, mistrust in government is not typically enough. It's not typically sufficient to block regulation because people are risk averse. People generally don't want their kids killing themselves at the instruction of a robot. What you need, in addition to that mistrust, is such a monumental conviction about the upside of unfettered development that these things start to feel worth it. Right? You start to actually have a population that says, well, it's tragic that these teenagers are killing themselves. It's tragic that the robot is talking them into it. But if Sam Altman is saying what he's saying, if he's telling the truth, that this robot will cure cancer, it still feels worth it. Right? Now, we have no reason at all, except the word of Sam Altman or the word of Dario, that those upsides are remotely possible. There's just no objective evidence to suggest with nearly the same conviction that AI will solve cancer that we can say with the conviction that chatbots will talk teenagers into suicide. We know one of these things is true. We have no evidence for the other. But until you have that strong upside, people generally aren't willing to tolerate these kinds of costs, and mistrust isn't enough to block that kind of regulation.
That's so fascinating and resonates so true with me of like, oh, that is how we work, right? And you go back to Kahneman Tversky, so your social science background, that there's something about our collective human consciousness that we're willing to do sort of human life arbitrage of, well, we're going to lose a few on the way, but it's worth this theoretical upside. And we do it all the time, right? Any student of history will go, well, that we did it there, and we did it there, and we did it there. There is something sort of very human about that. Hey, we're willing. I mean, this is very crass, and we're probably going to get like red flag for this on YouTube or whatever. But we're willing to sacrifice a few teenagers for the hopes that we might cure cancer.
Yeah. And it starts to permeate on the margins too, because that very human tendency, as you put it, and I agree, creates the space to characterize what are genuinely preventable tragedies as accidents that happen on the way to progress. There is no reason at all that these labs could not have anticipated the threats that have materialized out of their models. There's no reason at all with the funding that they do have. But when you have a population that is convinced we're going to do away with cancer, you have their ear and kind of the plausible deniability to say, like, well, all of our attention was focused on AGI for cancer. So, of course, we overlooked this. This is a really hard thing to do.
Well, just to remind the audience, this is not theoretical for you. You have firsthand experience of this. You were at Google. You were at OpenAI.
Yes.
You know what it's like to say, hey, breaks, we have some safety risk issues, and you've watched some version, maybe not these exact people, but some of these people's associates make these trade-offs between safety and speed.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I'm part of a large and growing number of people that left OpenAI specifically because of just profound disagreements with how they, as a company, handled these trade-offs. And I always have to remind people that, like, I didn't meet anyone evil at OpenAI. It's right. Not like, there's people just kind of putting their fingers together like this and saying, yes, how much bad can we do? There's just so much buck passing in the name of unimaginable wealth. I mean, the humans inside of these labs are prone to the exact same dynamic that we were just discussing. Like, they have equity packages that operate in their mind the same way that the promise that will solve cancer operates in the minds of the average person. It's just something you can't even touch. And so these people who can't really objectively conceive of what's on the other side of that equity vesting moment have a very different incentive structure than you and I, right? They're like, well, any other employer, I probably wouldn't have tolerated that. But once I'm out, once this vests, right? And so they also have this kind of like false promise on the other end, a little bit less false because that equity will vest. We don't know that cancer will be solved.
Well, and it gets back to one of my parking lot things, which is money. And part of what we're seeing, and you're seeing this show up in a lot of places, is the sort of the human being's susceptibility to the casino, right? That casino emotional rhythm of pull the slot machine, might get something, pull the slot machine, get something just enough to feel good, right? And now casino is a way that we talk about algorithms. It's a way that we talk about social media. It's a way we talk about a lot of things. But it's interesting to think about even the inside of the lab as its own casino, right? There is, and that the bigger, at some point, the scale of the casino becomes too much for even a relatively ethical, moral human brain to withstand, right? You put yourself in the pressure, under the pressure of that casino, and it's very hard. Like the neural libidinal like strength required to go, I'm gonna not pull the lever we're just not built for it, right? We're literally body brain wise not built for it.
We need each other.
Yeah.
Like we as humans need other humans. This is just a demonstrated fact over time that you'll die on your own. And I don't mean like you need a partner, you need kids. Like you need to be in a society of humans that specialize in order to have any meaningful quality of life. This is something we know in our bones. And so then when you are consciously out there navigating in the world, you're doing things that are productive and valuable for other people, you are surrounded by that community and that society. And unconsciously, you are appreciating at any given moment in time, you could be effectively excommunicated from that society, right? And so these questions of ethic get baked into the social contract that is part and parcel of survival, right? Like you start activating this question of, will I no longer survive if I don't go along with X, Y, and Z? I mean, the reason that I left was a profound discomfort, but it was also a profound fear of what I was becoming, right? Like if you are there and you're self-aware, you can see the change in your own trade-offs if you're willing to look at it. I left before any of my equity vested because I was very concerned about what kind of person I would be if I waited until that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you think particularly about these labs and the scale of it. I mean, part of the reason why this is we talked earlier about, well, why are they using these communication strategies? What's the motive? What's the incentive, et cetera? And why at this level of scale? Well, because the risk is enormous and it just keeps getting bigger. Not the risk of the software, but the more capitalized this thing becomes, right? The bigger the casino. And the amount of money that's been spent and the promises that have been made, and we're now at such a massive scale that, yeah, sure, we probably should cure cancer, but we definitely got to pay people back. Right? We
Yep.
and and you can argue Elon is probably in this version the smartest guy in the bunch because he's about to defer all that risk into the capital markets. He's going to go public. Because then he doesn't have to worry about, the fallout.
And that's been the strategy time and again. And that's why it's not just Elon doing this IPO. And it's the reason that Elon filed this IPO confidentially. It's the reason that OpenAI has been very public about their IPO. It's the reason that Anthropic recently came out saying that they want to have an IPO before OpenAI does. Because there will come a moment in time when it is clear to an observer of sound mind that cancer solution isn't coming. And what happens to the capitalization of these labs when that becomes obvious is clear to anyone involved in this, which is why it's a bit of a game of musical chairs right now. How much can you extract before that ends? And this may sound doomerish, but there's a fantastic book. I was just looking it up to make sure that I get the name right, by Carlotta Perez, Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital. Dynamics of Bubbles and Golden Ages. It's a really fantastic book written by a sociologist. And she was writing this in the 90s. But if you pick it up today and you read it, it's word for word a story about AI. And it's a story about ultimately technologies like steam engines and the railroad. This is what she's writing about. And she says that in all of these, there's these two periods of time. There's the first, when this new technology enters the scene and no one knows what it can do. And the reason that we get financial bubbles around that is because the society we inhabit conducts discovery through financial capital. The way we discover whether something is possible is by investing into it. And so in the early days of technology, you get this massive overcapitalization that, as this author argues, is an effort to discover, could we cure cancer? Maybe we can. Can a steam engine take us to the moon? Maybe. But the important part of this book is that moment ends. The discovery is a learning process. And once we've done enough discovery, you know enough about the technology that investments become more rational. They're no longer looking for things that aren't possible, and the capitalization shrinks by orders of magnitude. People leading these labs are not dumb. They know and appreciate, I think, that this is a temporary and unprecedented moment in time in terms of securing fungible capital for them to do other things after that.
Well, yeah. And I mean, so quickly, we'll put that book in the show notes and then I'm going to read it and then maybe we'll talk about it later. So thank you for that. For those of you who like the more academic end of the pool or a deeper read on stuff like this, absolutely grab that. We'll maybe do a little book group on it. But also, I would recommend next to it, just grab Palo Alto with it, which is a great historical take on you talk about the railroads, and the Palo Alto does a brilliant job of explaining that all of this was modeled on the railroad business, and then we're doing it again and again and again out of the Palo Alto model. But I don't think we can. Speaking of Palo Alto, I don't think we can talk about this without talking about what you had said a few minutes ago, which is its connection to the defense industry. All mass capitalized technology projects end up as defense projects in some way, shape, or form, right? Or at least are some way intertwined, right? So what's going on there? What should people know? How is that impacting how this story is being told? Because obviously that's their best buyer of services.
It's their best buyer. It is also their most gullible buyer, and it is their most important buyer. I have shared an unpopular opinion with some people that if I were running a lab, like if I were running OpenAI or if I were running Anthropic, especially Anthropic, my goal would be nationalization. Like my goal would basically be to become DARPA. And it's incredible to me that no lab has kind of made this explicit move, because that is a kill shot. Why would the government want to rely on a private contractor if they could have their own in-house version? We know that this worked with DARPA. It still leaves room for outside contracting. And most importantly, it secures your long-term survival. Remember what we were just talking about. There's this moment where the capitalization faucet is going to get turned way down eventually when the discovery is clear. And that's why the government is the most important buyer, because if you can get them dependent, that's independent of the free market. You're
Absolutely.
But the bigger picture is this question of like, what can AI do that the government cares about? And the answer is a lot. I mean, one of the things that we at the lab that I lead focus on is labor substitution, right? So when I left OpenAI, I was very concerned about what I'm now calling societally scaled risks, which are these points where technology starts to substitute for friction in human relationships. We see this with chatbots, right? Like people who won't avail themselves of mental health support go to a chatbot and terrible things happen. We're seeing this increasingly with political opinions. We see this with work. There's more friction in hiring a human than there is in lines of code. And so people are trying to actively substitute this. There's an element of that is resource scarcity. And there's very few entities more resource scarce than the government when you look at the ratio of what they're trying to do versus what they're actually resourcing against it. So they're a prime customer for this substitution argument, which makes them a prime candidate for overblown claims about what you can substitute, right? Like we know now that the Pentagon has been relying on leading frontier models to target military targets in Iran strikes. We don't yet know if the strike on that children's school that killed hundreds of children was directed by a frontier model or not. We'll probably never know if that was actually the case. Governments want technology like this in part because of the capability it affords. There's a conviction that much like AI could cure cancer, maybe AI could give you a battlefield advantage. It's very difficult to know that until you've tested it. The anarchy that characterizes the global system kind of means that even if you don't think there's a good chance of that, you kind of have to test it because China might be doing it, Russia might be doing it. In fact, they'd be crazy not to. So at this point, I'm already getting ready to do it. There are also irrational reasons that governments want this kind of capability, and that's where you start getting the hype arguments from the labs about like AI that can write policy. We know that that's not going to go well. So you get this really nasty symbiosis between a resource-constrained entity, in this case a government, and a well-resourced software provider, basically. That's all these labs are at this moment in time, that is well-positioned to argue outsized things about what that software can do for the government.
Well, I want to get to labor displacement and what you guys are doing over at Maiden, because I think it's really, really important. Just quickly on the government side of it, though, do you think part of the reason why, because I think your argument on being nationalized is actually an incredibly logical one, whatever people feel about it from their own reactivity, I think that the logic makes sense. Do you think part of the reason why that's not even in the open discussion is this sort of feigned libertarianism that Silicon Valley likes to sort of costume around of like, oh, we're small government people. It's individual men doing individual great men things. Like, do you think that's impactful in the way that they think about, or at least publicly talk about their intentions?
I think libertarianism is typically a frame. I don't think, from my experience or relationships with anybody in Silicon Valley, that it is a legitimate conviction behind any of these. It is a uniquely American frame, kind of like pull yourself up by bootstraps. So it's resonant in a way that lines up nicely with that mistrust of government. But what I think is happening here is actually best characterized by the CEO of Palantir. I think it was a few years ago, he came out and basically said, like, politics doesn't work. It's extremely difficult and it's extremely slow to change the world through politics, but that through technology, you can force the issue, right? Like, no one's ever going to vote to put themselves out of a job. No one's ever going to vote to put themselves in minimum wage conditions for the rest of their life. But if you develop a technology that can meaningfully substitute high compensation work in a free market where there's no regulatory response to that dynamic or the humanitarian consequences, you can force that reality. And that's ultimately, I think, what we're seeing. And it becomes palatable when it's conveyed as something great men are doing as individuals, you know?
Yeah. Okay, let's get to labor displacement. And I want to talk about this from two angles. I want you to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing at Maiden and what you're discovering about sort of what's going on with Gen AI and LLMs and labor displacement. And then I want us to eventually get to, I'm a person running a company. I have to make staffing decisions. I have had some successes of a frictionless experience with some, LLMs on some things that make me optimistic. How should I be thinking about labor displacement as a person who runs a business? In my hypothetical example. So why don't you just start with, again, what you guys are doing at Maiden and what you're discovering, introduce that to our audience.
Sure. I'm going to start with an anecdote. I was asked a question akin to this in one of my interviews at OpenAI, which is like, roughly, with the advent of AGI, artificial general intelligence, something that can outperform us, what do you think the biggest problem is going to be? What do you think the biggest challenge is going to be? And I think I confused them because my answer was something like, it's going to become very, very important for us to understand the unique value of being human. Like, what uniquely makes a person if something is outperforming us in a certain domain. I think they wanted something a bit more about like nuclear bombs or something. Now, when I left OpenAI, I kind of took a month to stew on disappointments. And one of them was that these labs, for reasons that we've talked about on this call, are making huge claims about the effect of this technology in the world, not least that it will unemploy lots of people. And by dint of their position, are doing nothing at all to mitigate this problem. They are taking some steps to measure it, but ultimately those are not so trustworthy steps because, again, these labs are positioned to sell their services. So they're in a position to misrepresent and over-represent the capability of these models. So I saw a huge gap that was related to that response in the interview. Like, what makes it important to be a human? What's uniquely valuable about being human? So we kicked off a project that we're calling Qubit, which is our effort to measure vulnerability in the workplace at a job and task level. What I did was kind of took my measurement hat from my time in academia and my time working in intelligence services in tech, and asked the best possible way to measure this before we get to the layoffs, right? Like, we are an organization that does not think you should get to 100 or 1,000 teenage suicides by the time you start measuring. You should be measuring things before you get to the suicides. The same thing I think is true about layoffs. You should not get to 1 million needlessly unemployed people to realize that it shouldn't have happened. You should get early in and start measuring things before you make that decision. So we went about this by taking some basic off-the-shelf data sets that exist. One of them is ONET. It's this massive data set of jobs annotated by people who work those jobs. So it's got like 920 something actual jobs across the US economy, 18 or 19,000 tasks that people actually do in those jobs on a daily basis. And it also has what's required for those tasks. So the knowledge, abilities, and skills that you need to do those. We took another data set, which is Stanford's Helm repository. That's every AI evaluation under the sun. It's got millions and millions and millions of questions and answers from hundreds of different AI models that are all expert graded. So correct, incorrect. What we do is to marry these two data sets by asking which of those knowledge, abilities, and skills from the ONET data set would you need to successfully answer the assessment questions from the Helm data set. So you can start proxy measuring. Well, based off of their performance on benchmarks, here's approximately how good any given model is at this economically valuable task. So this gives us a first cut proxy of evidence-based measurement. Based off of real tests, how well can AI perform this class of tasks? But we go beyond that. I mean, this is more in line with what I raised as the anecdote at the beginning, because we also measure two different features of tasks independent of AI capability. One of them is the extent to which that is actually exposed to digital automation at all. Is it highly procedural? Are the inputs and outputs already digitally accessible? Even if AI has all of the requirements for something, if you don't have a digitally accessible task, you're going to hit some kind of challenge. The other part being the human elements of it, right? So how socio-emotionally driven is the task? Does it require a body to actually execute? These latter two dimensions, I think, are equally important to the first, right? Everybody's thinking about this as, can AI do the thing? Very few people are asking, what do I lose when I stop having a person in this role? And where I ultimately anticipate most of this conversation is going to end is, how do I equip humans that are working for and with me with tools that make them more efficient? I don't think almost anything is actually going to be wholly replaced. But there is this question of, how do you surgically empower people to do things that remain important to do as a human, and to do more efficiently what you can do more efficiently with technology?
Yeah, so I think, just to potentially oversimplify, right, that the end game here looks more like augmentation than replacement.
Yeah.
That may still have labor effects, right? If we have a highly augmented workforce that does produce productivity gains, and those productivity gains are not going to be equally balanced, and some roles become more important than others, and that kind of a thing, and that's part of what you're trying to surface. So if I'm a knowledge worker, and I'm looking at what you guys have learned in the lab, what's my big takeaway so far, right? What should I think about? Should I be laying in bed at night in a panic about the death of my career, right? So as a knowledge worker, how should I see what you're learning?
I'm one of those people that lives in the middle. So I wouldn't be losing sleep over it. One thing that I think a lot of catastrophic thinkers overlook is the pace of economy-wide change. There's still businesses with landlines. There's still businesses that use AOL. This is slow, even though it feels fast, right? And the world is big. So this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. But that said, even if it is just augmentation, the landscape will move in precarious ways. So I look at Klarna. Klarna is a really great example of a company that went all in on AI. They laid off their entire customer service division. And this was back in 2023. And I think it was last year, the CEO came out and he was like, we got it wrong, guys. Everyone hated our AI customer service. They all just wanted to talk to a human. And where he ended the story is, so we rehired all the humans. And what a happy, heartwarming story. This is great. The humans got their jobs back, AI lost. But what he didn't share was that they only brought back some of the people. They brought them all back part-time on a contract basis. So they no longer have healthcare. They no longer have the same salary. That's what I lie awake fearing, is basically the gig economification of every job if it's augmented without protections. Which is why when we're building this tool, we think about how to make it useful for knowledge workers, and for employers especially, but I'm especially thinking about how to make this useful for unions. I'm especially thinking about how to make this useful for regulators in California, for regulators in Singapore, in countries that take this much more seriously and proactively. Because even if it is imperfect measurement, I think that having a calibrating tool is really important to motivate those reactions, to motivate those proactive protections.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what we're seeing is not a mass remaking of big sections of jobs that are being replaced by robots. I think what we're seeing is a lot of minor shifts done in dramatic ways that justify, like you said, the gigification of work. And so, that big stat that came out earlier in the year that I've talked about many times is that this is the first year since the Industrial Revolution that more people will be in contract work than traditional labor in America. So More than half of workers today are doing contract work instead of being full-time employees for the first time since the Industrial Revolution. That's a big deal. That matters. That changes the way things are done. And I know a ton of people who work in contract type relationships, and there's a whole skill set that goes, forget health insurance. That's a huge problem all by itself. But there's literally the skill set, the ability to function in the economy in a way where you're not formally attached to anything, where you probably have 2 or 3 different relationships you have to manage. How do you do it so you're not working 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. answering Slacks all day? Like these are very real pragmatic human effects that don't necessarily show up in big giant labor disruption numbers, but show up really qualitatively in people's lives.
And they show up over a longer period of time than it takes to prompt a chatbot, right? So Joe CEO is making a decision today. His employees will see this when it comes time to retire, right? And that is, for me, the big motivation behind all of this is the asymmetry of timing on the perceived upsides and the very real downsides. And this has been true of a lot of technological advancement over time. It took us a long time to appreciate what was happening with social media, and it didn't take us very long to adopt it at all. I think the same thing is playing out here, but we have riches from history to draw on. Like we know that we can do it differently this time, and it just takes choosing to do that.
So let's go to Joe CEO, many of whom are listening. They quite reasonably, I think, do not necessarily feel the call to abstention. They're not like, I'm not going to be an AI teetotaler. I've got already have use cases. I have whatever. So I'm not going to be that guy. You're going to have to be, you're going to have to judge me, think I'm a terrible person, whatever. I'm going to prompt some stuff. But they want to be smart and they don't want to be part of the problem and they care about their employees, right? So how do you want that person to think about this process and this disruption?
I tend to encourage people to break up the tech stack when they think about it. And I'll try to keep this really simple, but like when you query OpenAI, like when you send a request to OpenAI, you're touching a bunch of different systems, right? If you're using ChatGPT, you're using an application layer, right? Like they wrote software on top of their model, and you're using their computers to execute all of that. So that's like 3 different things that's happening all at once. It's compute power, it's an actual model that's making an input-output, and it's a software interface that's intermediating the whole thing. The vast majority of end users, including Joe CEO most of the time, assume that these things all go together. You can't have one without the other. That's not true at all. I have open source models that I can run on this laptop. There are open source models that I can run on cloud compute. I can write my own software to host the chatbot so that I'm not pushing something into someone else's company. There's open source versions of that software, right?
Yes.
UI. It gets confusing fast. But the reason that I'm walking through this is maintaining strategic independence is the best thing you can do as a non-teetotaler. And I don't think it's wise to teetotal at this moment in time. I think strategic engagement is the smart move. The problem for Joe CEO is that that's now kind of more overhead on you as a decision maker, right? Like you need some way to stay abreast of the movements in the technology market, right? So like Google just recently dropped Gemma 4. It's a family of open source models that are a pretty significant advancement in reasoning capabilities by size for open source models. There are a ton of people out there right now, some of them might even be listening, that are using OpenAI and paying OpenAI for model capabilities that they could definitely satisfy through Gemma 4, right? OpenAI does not want them to move off their systems. They want them to continue using this, in no small part because OpenAI is offering all of these services well below cost. It's being subsidized by VCs to offer you, Joe CEO, AI credits for less than it actually costs them. That will not go on forever. And much like with...
There's a big shift on this. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so as you have a recalibration in tokenomics where the price actually starts to correspond to the cost of delivering services, you, Joe CEO, who has locked yourself into OpenAI system, are going to be a frog in boiling water. That price is going to go up, 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 up. And because you haven't built the infrastructure to maintain strategic independence, plugging in a different model, going to a different provider, it's going to be a nightmare downstream if you don't pay attention to the decisions today. The takeaway is Joe CEO needs to hire a chief AI officer who's capable of staying abreast of all of those things, capable of building a nimble infrastructure. So in 5 years, you don't have that nightmare moment.
100%. And I love what you said, and I love that you've taken us through some of the technological layers of it. I think to maybe translate it even into sort of a don't speak tech language, right? Almost all CEOs that have some experience, our clients know this, right? They've had the experience of two versions of a similar thing. One is tech debt, and the other is vendor lockup. Tech debt is you're locked into a bunch of stuff. You're paying a ton of money for things that you don't really use, but you wanted a little piece of it, but you end up with the whole thing. So you got to pay the right. And this is the long history of all-in-one packages. And this software does all these things. Just buy it in one big chunk, right? And then all of a sudden you're stuck. And then you're in vendor lockup, which is my entire business is wrapped around this thing that because of their business interest isn't what it was when I built my business around it, but now I'm stuck. And, there was a viral thing that went around today that is a perfect example of this. Some silly person posted a screenshot of her Anthropic bill, said, here's our monthly Anthropic bill, and it's $111,000 for Anthropic credits. We have no idea what her revenue is, so whatever. But it's 111,000, and she goes, but we're doing engineering and we're doing HR, and she lists off all the departments that are in some way feeding off of this black box. And my immediate reaction was, what CFO in the world wants a giant bill that's maybe 30-40% of the P&L that they can't even parse into departments? It's just,
and what would they say if someone showed them what the price could be?
right.
If you did a little bit of the irony here is that these labs are in a market position where they're being forced to charge below cost because they could not compete if they were not.
Absolutely not. You're right.
And they're getting people used to low prices for something that will not remain low priced for a long period of time, right? So like both of the things that you're describing are possibilities with AI. The interesting caveat here is that these companies, the AI labs, have built themselves into a position of additional vulnerability, which is that their main offering to the economy, which is these models, it's not really the computers that run them, it's not really the applications. The thing that they uniquely do is build models. Those models enable Joe CEO to develop alternatives to the application layer if they have their own compute. So like you can make use of this technology to avoid lock-in on this technology in those ways. It just requires a bit of forethought.
I think this is such a critical thing, and in some ways I feel bad that we're 50 minutes in and we're just saying this thing, but I'll put it in the beginning and tell you to fast forward if you need to. Everybody thinks the argument here is some sort of primarily an ethical or moralistic kind of an argument. And to me, it's risk management. To me, this is about how do we be in a society together, be in an economy together, be in a company together, and make risk managing decisions while still moving forward. And so when I'm telling companies, you got to be careful about signing these big contracts and getting, oh, you just don't like AI. I'm like, listen, I'm a little smarter than just, I don't like AI, right? I've used these services. I use them today, right? It's not the point. The point is, I can make this case from a capitalistic perspective. The most capitalistic, least intelligent thing to do is to de-risk here.
Yeah. And that requires some discomfort. So like de-risking requires you to understand what is happening when you send a message to ChatGPT, because you need to know what parts of that process you could substitute or bring in-house or do somewhere else, right? It is uncomfortable to try to learn about this. And this is one of those narrative frames. Earlier in the call, we were talking about it, but this is one of those things that the labs do, is make the technology appear prohibitively complicated, right? Yeah. So like I'm talking about this in semi-technical terms. I'm not a technologist. I'm a social scientist. I'm trained in political science. I'm familiar with these things because I went through the uncomfortable process of learning about them. And I can tell you about a mixture of experts model in a way that can give you implications for compute. But that's not really what matters here. Ultimately, what matters here is knowing the system well enough that you can make decisions you feel comfortable will not constrain you in ways you want to avoid. And what I fear is that that's just happening across the board.
Yeah, these businesses that are setting themselves up to be wholesale dependent on a very unreliable actor that has absolutely no incentive to take care of you. This is just bad human behavior. You don't rent land from the cruelest, most fear-based landlord in town. You just don't do it. Here's the metaphor I've been playing with, and I'll have you react to it. I want our business owners to think like they're in F1, right? So go watch F1 on Apple. It's not an ad. And you think about how much of the race those cars spend intentionally behind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They're watching everybody pull in front of them. And you have to have a certain amount of skill and a certain amount of strategic thinking to go, it is the right thing to do to be temporarily behind,
Mm-hmm.
or at least feel temporarily behind, so that I can act when the system is to my advantage. And I think a lot of businesses, that's what they need to be doing right now. They need to live within the pain of feeling like they're behind. They aren't really behind, but feeling like they're behind. They're only experimenting. They're not going whole hog. They aren't going to be able to go on LinkedIn and telling them that they're AI forward. They can't do all that stuff because that's not where they are. They're lagging a little bit so that they're not caught up in a slipstream that's going to spin them out and spin everybody else out with them, and make the move when it's advantageous. There will be times when it can be advantageous and you're not dependent on actors that aren't in community with you, that don't have a relationship with you, right? So beat up my metaphor.
I like it. I like it a lot. I like it a lot when I think about the labs specifically. So like for me, that metaphor holds especially well when I try to explain Anthropic. Like why is Anthropic pulling ahead? Well, they were comfortable being in second place for a while, and they did not thrash to get out of it. They took very strategic decisions. I mean, look, they don't have multimodal models. They don't have a video generator. Sora just got deprecated. They don't have a voice generator. They went all in on a very specific thing. OpenAI, meanwhile, is trying to do everything under the sun, including being its own compute provider. And look what's happening at the Abilene plant. Like other tech companies are now leasing it out because they can't perform across all of these different things. So your metaphor makes a lot of sense to me for the labs, and I can see how it applies to companies that are thinking about AI in a competitive lens. I am thinking about this also in a car metaphor, but slightly differently, which is less in the competitive sense and more in the what is AI doing for you sense. So let's take what I was pointing out earlier about the price. I tend to think about current enterprise AI projects as equivalent to being like, I'm going to have all of my employees take an Uber to the office. I'm going to let them all sell their cars. This is at the beginning of Uber. And so it's cheap, it's convenient. They can do work on the way to the office. How cool. And then 10 years later, Uber costs more than a taxi. None of your employees have cars because you made them all sell them, right? And you have to ask, like, is this really what I wanted, when in those 10 years I could have been building a car, right? And I don't really know how cars work. I didn't even really know if I wanted to own a car. But importantly, I didn't ask that question. I heard about Uber and I just decided all my employees are going to get to work by Uber. And I didn't critically assess whether it would be valuable to me to use Lyft, or to get my own car, or to go with the city's taxi network, right? Like, and this is kind of what I mean about deconstructing the tech stack. Like, what's involved in an employee getting to work? There's many different steps. It's not all one single thing. Well, is the service that you're looking at truly the best across all of those, right? And in the long term, would you not rather have your own vehicle? I think most people would. You don't need to be in a race to care about your car, to care about the nature of your ownership of that car and what the implications of that nature is.
I love that. Okay, last question. This is the last question I always ask everybody. This is, as we've talked all along, this is a very emotional topic. This is a category that flares people up either because the world is going to be better and utopia is on the brink. I find that dubious, but maybe. Or, sort of spinning out into despair. Your job is to look at risk and look at things that are a little bit scary, but what gives you hope in what you spend your days doing?
But that's tricky. What gives me hope? Working in tech can be very isolating. You're surrounded by people, and you're surrounded by people that are relatively like-minded, and even people who would claim that they're mission-oriented. But I have not experienced the kind of solidarity in tech or anywhere else, really, that I've experienced since leaving. Um, the advent of all of these problems, potentially catastrophic unemployment, known suicidal and murder suicide rates associated with these chatbots, like all of these things are being responded to. There are humans that are taking these issues seriously, and even if the response is not perfect, are putting time and energy into solutions, reorienting their entire careers, and are relating to one another, right? So every call that I used to have in my past lives as like an academic or in tech was scheduled around a particular project, right? It had something outcome oriented. At this moment in time, every call that I get to have, all the relationships that I establish are on a singular foundation of mutual concern. And there's just a fundamentally different kind of solidarity that comes through that has me hopeful. I mean, having studied political economy, you get cynical about what people will do if they're not, you know, promised their wildest dreams for that kind of thing, or at least kind of like paid handsomely. But I get to see a lot of people that really are genuinely mission driven. What I want to add beyond the hope is what I see as the opportunity at this moment in time, which is our relationships to ourselves and our relationships to disappointment. So there's no shortage of things to be disappointed about when it comes to AI, the bad things that it's created, the cancer it hasn't solved yet, right? The water systems that are being poisoned by the data centers that are being constructed. That disappointment has a lot for us in it. In that disappointment are convictions about the ways that the world can and should be better. And some of it is out of reach, but not all of it. And if we actually sit with our disappointment, we get a pathway into hope because we get visibility into what we can authentically see could be there.
Because it's sometimes the best way to see what we believe and what we're willing to fight for, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's like I was having a conversation with one of my teenage sons, and he was upset about something related to the way of the world. Won't go into the details. And I got to the end of the conversation, and I said, "This reaction, this disappointment, this frustration that you're having, I don't know that I've ever trusted you more than I trust you right now, because it tells me what you care about and that you are willing to care about it, even though you can't control the outcome." And I agree with you. This sense that there are a lot of people with different answers. We disagree on the past. We disagree on, abstention or not, all these kind of things. But there is an increasing amount of solidarity that there are problems worth solving, and that if we lean in, we can actually solve them. Well, for lack of getting a little bit too teary-eyed, I am given hope by this conversation, Tim. This has been a real gift. I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful for a person with your intellect and understanding and experience. I expected we would have a really smart, brilliant conversation today. You literally took my breath away when you said we need each other. And so for us to be able to modulate between those places, between the heart and the mind,
Thank you, Nick. It's been such a treat. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, and it was a unique pleasure to chat with you on this show. So thank you again.
You guys, if you're here at the end, and I hope that you are, I am still in the same place I was when I left off with Tim. I am so grateful for that conversation. We always finish the show with me answering 3 questions about the conversation that we've had with our guest. The first one is, how am I carrying this conversation? And how is it still landing with me? What I said to Tim at the end still holds for me is, what a gift to talk to a person who really has thought through these issues, is not coming to it from a place from either dogma or propaganda, which is really the bulk of what we get on these kind of things, or reactivity of, oh, we got to do this now, we got to do this now, we do this now, who has a sense of the slowness of things, that things are never moving as fast as they appear they are, and who can speak to the technical issues, speak to the societal issues, but also really dig in on what it means for individual decision making. When he said, we as humans need each other, we literally need each other, it took my breath away. And I think part of what these layers and layers and layers, and we have a video of this about this on YouTube called six layer dip. These layers and layers and layers of technological intervention that are just a part of our life, is good, bad, or indifferent, and how it's created deeper and deeper feelings of isolation. I'm hopeful that there are so many brilliant people in the conversation, like Tim, who are asking, well, how do we do this better? How do we not succumb ourselves to this? How do we learn from the mistakes of the past? How do we lean forward and believe that we can make progress together without doing foolish, risk-laden things that cause massive amounts of harm? Just really, really encouraging stuff for any leader, knowledge worker, person, while still acknowledging that we all have decisions to make. We all have professions and careers to build. What do I want leaders to get out of this? I think you caught most of that in the recording itself. Go watch F1. And I want you to literally feel in your body, watching that movie, what it feels like when Brad Pitt's intentionally losing, intentionally being criticized for being behind and not hitting the numbers and not hitting the targets. And so many of you I talk to on a regular basis are feeling this pressure. We got to do this if we're going to go behind. We got to do this because the customers demand it. We got to do this because this is the thing. And there's very little that is really that much at stake. That really, if we can peel down the hype and live with the tension, live with the vulnerability of feeling a little bit like we're not the first man on the beach, then we actually are in a position to act strategically. And we're in a position to act in a trust-made way that will deepen relationship with clients, expand our opportunities with new clients, deepen our trust with our other partners, with capital, with our investors, all of the constituents that we serve, if we can live comfortably in that feeling of being perceived either by ourselves or by others as being a little bit behind, so that we're waiting for our moment. And then the last question we always ask is, what does this mean for trust? It's hard out there, gang. There are so many things working to undermine trust and to play into the casino brain. And pull that lever, pull that lever, pull that lever, so that we stop thinking, not just analytically, but thinking deeply connected to our values and to our mission and to our priority. It's not just about being more analytical, although that would help. It's that casino brain pulls us out of connectivity to our mission and our values and our priorities, and now we're just succumbing to the need to win the next lottery pull. And the leaders who want to be trust made, the leaders who listen to this podcast, the leaders who are part of our community, I know you guys, you don't want that. You don't want that. And so the more we can remind ourselves that to build in a trust-made way, to build with trust at the center of what we do, is so much harder than it appears because we have so much working against us. So we have to be that much more intentional. We have to be that much more strategic with each decision that we make, so that we're not wasting time playing unintentionally, almost always playing at the casino of the next big new idea or whatever's playing on our nervous system. Thanks for being with us on this episode. Thanks to Tim. Thanks to Maiden Labs. What a brilliant organization. Check them out. We'll have the link in the show notes, and we'll see you next time here on Dam's Given.